Our first speaker is Nick Selvaggio, Senior Cloud Solution Architect Security at Microsoft Canada. As a cloud solution architect focusing on information and cybersecurity, Nick has over 10 years of industry experience in security consulting role. Throughout his career, Nick has worked on many large-scale and mission-critical projects, including security architecture assessment and the design of complex custom security solutions. And Nick will talk about cloud migration, simplified and secured.
Hey everybody, thanks for the intro, Brian. As Brian mentioned, I'm Nick Selvaggio. I'm one of the security cloud solution architects at Microsoft Canada. And today I'm going to be talking about how cloud migrations can be a little bit more simple and also keeping in mind the security aspect of it. Now, I probably could talk about this topic for several hours, so it's obviously very condensed, but I hope there's some information that you can get out of this presentation that'll help. So I wanted to start with talking about the climate today and how companies are being forced to transform themselves, and really those that make the transformation either survive or thrive in today's economy. So if I ask a hypothetical question, like how many purchases do you make online in the past month, or how many brick and mortar stores did you go to make a purchase? And then when you're walking to those brick and mortar stores, how many businesses did you notice that were actually closed or replaced by something new? You know, this really shows that digital transformation is an economic imperative. And if we even think about how music services have changed in the past 10 or 15 years, moving from, tapes to CDs, and now it's completely streaming. Vinyl's making a comeback, but people that use vinyl still use music streaming services. And even if we look at, digital movies being delivered by companies like Netflix, the businesses that I use have all embraced digital and cloud technologies, and I bet it's the same for most of you. So I want to talk a bit about triggers for migration and modernization. So this is why organizations decide to move to cloud services. Really, these are very common when people think about digital transformations. Common triggers include cash flow challenges. So not just for businesses, but also the entire ecosystem. So we're looking at suppliers, distributors, and customers. And moving from capital expenditures to OpEx helps make P&L predictable by paying only for what's consumed. There's also a lot of cybersecurity threats that we're facing now that really weren't even possible 5 to 6 years ago. And a lot of our customers are feeling vulnerable to attackers that have dispersed and hybrid workforces. And then we also talk about scaling a lot, and this is one of the biggest reasons I find that organizations will move. It's because they experience a surge at a certain time of year, and it requires a lot of capital to be able to handle that may not be utilized normally. So using the scaling feature of cloud services and only paying when you need to scale up, which is usually linked to some sort of increased business event, is another common trigger. But when we talk about the modernization side, there's also factors like innovating applications and delivering a faster time to the market. Instead of doing static application releases every month, you can now do them daily and do updates to your applications without even any downtime, especially when we talk about Kubernetes and how that infrastructure can easily scale to a new type of application version. There also are some hard migration triggers, such as a data center contract expiry, where organizations will look a year or maybe several years, the more time the better, down the road, and say, is it worth keeping this data center still? Usually those organizations already have cloud services, so it might make sense to consolidate that and save costs. And then specific to COVID, enabling hybrid work. With the lockdowns that we're kind of still experiencing, there's obviously an increasingly hybrid workforce that'll probably stay around even when things go back to normal, whenever that is. And we found that cloud adoption is key to maintaining productivity and business continuity. So how does migration and modernization of apps and migration to cloud services help? So I've listed a few of the key advantages here. The first I mentioned in the previous slide was by flipping CapEx to OpEx. So by only paying for what you're consuming and not spending on maintaining data centers. Another one is scalability. The cloud capacity is scalable effortlessly and virtually unlimited, not completely unlimited, but usually unlimited to what an organization would consume. And then when we talk about security, now this is a difficult topic to discuss because there are a ton of cloud security applications and controls solutions out there. This really depends on the cloud provider that you're going to use or using external tools. But you know, at Microsoft, we invest over $1 trillion in security investments, and we have over 3,500 cybersecurity professionals to make our cloud services secure and compliant. But I am going to talk a bit about responsibilities and ensuring that you understand where those shared responsibilities are, because the cloud provider is not responsible for every component of security typically. And then also removing operational burdens of managing data centers really frees up IT resources to focus on innovation for your business and your customers. So what is cloud migration and modernization? I touched upon it briefly, but I want to go a bit more in depth. So migration is the process of moving applications, infrastructures, and data from one location, which is often a company's private on-site or on-premise data center, to a public cloud provider's infrastructure. As an example, migrating an on-prem physical or virtual server to cloud infrastructure as a service. The main cloud migration benefits include reducing IT costs, enhancing security and resiliency, and on-demand scale. Now, when we talk about modernization, modernization is the process of updating existing, and sometimes these are legacy applications for newer computing approaches, including new application frameworks and use of cloud-native technologies. This can be done using platform as a service, containers, low-code apps, and database as a service architectures. And key benefits to this include app innovation, agility, developer velocity, and cost optimization. And cloud migration and modernization is really a continuous process that involves significant organizational change management that span people, process, and technology. I really need to emphasize that I recommend taking a holistic approach because this will not only help you navigate the journey successfully, but it'll also help ensure the organization realizes new benefits, including efficiency, agility, and scale, once your workloads are running in the cloud. And when we talk about the different phases of this is at a very high level, but the planning phase is arguably one of the most important. Many migration projects fail, and I personally witnessed this myself, because people skip a lot of the planning phases and just go down straight into running an assessment tool and migrating everything. That's a bad approach to take, just because you need to document your business outcomes, what you want to achieve, what's your motivation, such as exiting your existing data center, increasing cost savings, or designing for greater agility. The other thing that's very, very important is involving and aligning key stakeholders. So really, we need to make sure that everybody is on board with the migration process and what the objectives are. And really, we recommend creating a center of excellence for either cloud or at least cloud migrations that contains a very, very cross-functional team made up of, let's say, IT, finance, and even business and application owners. When we get down to the planning phase, this is also, so there's defined strategy and then planning. And when I say planning, I'm talking about discovering and assessing the environment. What are you planning on moving? This is also very, very, very important, even down to the level of doing a dependency analysis, where you actually determine what is running on all of my servers and what do they connect to. The reason this was important is because typically you wouldn't migrate your whole environment overnight, especially if the environment's very, very large into the tens of thousands of servers. So you need to do a phased approach, and it's very difficult to determine in what order should you move things, or what connectivity do you need back to your on-prem data center if you don't have that inventory ready. So now let's take a look at a customer's cloud adoption journey. So for new apps, organizations tend to build them cloud natively using serverless technologies or platform as a service, really using the power of our cloud services. But for existing apps, there's many options. You can modernize them using containers or serverless. This will allow you to maximize the cloud benefits, mainly cost and scalability. Or you could lift and shift them into an infrastructure as a service environment to take advantage of OpEx and cloud scale. For apps that aren't custom built, many customers also choose to retire them and replace them with a software as a service solution or low code apps. And some apps may need to stay on premises due to reasons like regulatory frameworks or data sovereignty. Or even latency issues. And it's important to enable those apps to be cloud connected. And even though there may be solutions to migrate some of those apps to a cloud service, there are some applications that are extremely sensitive to latency that we recommend keeping on premise still. But no matter where your application runs in a multi-cloud environment, on premise or at the edge, it's important to enable a consistent identity security and management methodology across all of these distributed environments. So now that I've gone over some of that base information about cloud migrations and modernizations, where do we start? So let's talk a little bit about how a typical migration journey looks like. So before migrating, the customer journey typically starts with discovering the IT estate and assessing their workloads and applications to understand the readiness in order to right-size the recommendations and the potential cloud costs. With this, everybody can make a call on what they migrate, when they want to migrate, and how they want to migrate. Then to execute the migration itself, organizations may choose one or more approaches to migrate their workload based on several different factors, such as the cost to migrate, the amount of time it'll take to migrate, organizational skill and maturity, and of course, how they want to optimize their application to take advantage of cloud-native features. One item I'd also like to place an emphasis on was what I mentioned about organizational skill and maturity. Every cloud provider has unique skills that are required to manage that platform. And even though they all operate on common technology principles, there are significant differences in how you interact with cloud services. Some cloud providers have very, very strong APIs, some have weak APIs, some are better on user interfaces. So it's important to take into account what are the skills of your current workforce, and also how can you enable them to gain additional training and experience to be part of this migration journey. Now I'm going to dig a bit deeper into each of those different phases. So before migrating workloads to Azure or another cloud service, we first need to understand what the current infrastructure is and define what the migrated workloads will look like. With some simple steps, we can comprehensively discover and assess on-premise workloads to figure out how they would run in Azure or another cloud service. So to start with any migration, we need to compile an inventory of the physical and virtual servers in the environment. While the current management tools may provide a good representation of the hundreds or maybe thousands of applications the organization is running, you need an inventory mechanism that can feed data into subsequent migration steps. So using a cloud migration assessment tool is very, very important to consider during this phase. Even if you have a CMDB or some other type of existing inventory, it's hard to analyze that data in a structure that would help you determining a cloud migration. And at the end of this phase, you'll have a complete inventory of servers and metadata, each allowing you to view profile information about each workload and performance metrics, which allows you to build that cloud migration plan. Using this information, you can also map your servers to on-premises applications, and this helps you identify dependencies or communication between servers so that you include all the necessary application components in your migration plan. And this helps to reduce risk and ensure a smooth migration. Now that we've discovered and grouped servers logically, it's time to perform the assessment. We need to include both technical and business stakeholders to select the best cloud migration strategy. And this screenshot that's on the screen here is something called a dependency analysis matrix. What this is mapped out is basically a certain cloud workload and how the different components interact with each other. Prior to cloud migration tools becoming mainstream, I did this manually using Excel and a few other business intelligence apps, and it was not a great experience. So there's a lot of good solutions on the market that can help you do these discovery and assessment processes, including the Azure Migrate tool that we offer. And then once you've done that, now we need to actually determine what methodology are we going to use to migrate these workloads. There's 4 widely adopted strategies: rehost, refactor, rearchitect, or rebuild. And each of these strategies can be leveraged by organizations depending on the business drivers and goals to moving to the cloud. For example, you could choose to rehost or lift and shift less strategic apps with no code changes, but re-architect others that are more business critical by decomposing them into microservices. And it's best for your migration team to adopt a simple migration decision tree. This will help drive your decisions based on the company's priorities and requirements. The decision tree should start with a simple question. Will your organization continue to invest in future development of the app? If you're going to continue to develop the app, then it would be best to, for example, refactor, re-architect, or rebuild. If it will stay static in its current form, rehosting is probably the best, and you can just move it to infrastructure as a service. Now, when we talk about these steps a bit more, or these different methodologies, when we talk about rehost, keep in mind that you might rehost applications on a short-term basis to move it to the cloud with the full intention of using a different strategy for the application's future. This is a very, very common and valid practice, as you would move the application to the cloud, and then you can move forward with development in the cloud at a later date. Migrating applications using rehosts will get you to the cloud, and then you can really start to optimize your costs and reduce over-provisioned resources to begin to save you money. This is also commonly referred to as lift and shift. When we talk about refactoring, this is also referred to as repackaging. It's a cloud migration approach that lets you minimally alter application code or apply configuration changes. So really, we're talking about minimal modifications to the actual application in this case. And this would allow you to take advantage of like platform as a service and other cloud native advantages. This would change the way the application works. So for example, instead of using a virtual machine that has SQL Server installed in it, you might use the Azure SQL managed instance, which removes a lot of the overhead of patching and maintaining the actual database infrastructure. This method should be used if you need to use an existing code base, and code portability is a concern, so it can be repackaged to work inside a cloud environment. And then when we talk about re-architecting, re-architecting allows you to fundamentally change the applications to make use of the cloud native services in one of the most efficient ways possible. This can help to optimize the application design and become cloud native. So this would require you to modify or extend your application's code base to optimize the app architecture for cloud scale. An example would be decomposing a monolithic application into microservices that work together and readily scale. And you should use this method if your application needs a major revision to incorporate new capabilities or to work more effectively on a cloud platform. And if you're going to start from scratch to become cloud native, then selecting rebuild would make sense. This is obviously the most amount of work effort. So this is where you would actually rebuild the application from scratch using cloud native technologies. And really, few applications will be migrated in this manner, especially at the beginning of a cloud migration. But you should use this approach if you want rapid development and the existing application is limited in terms of functionality. So basically, if you're thinking about rebuilding it anyways, it's a good idea to look at building it in a cloud native manner. You know, cloud native development can even be in the form of containers and Kubernetes clusters, which can be more easily migrated to a cloud provider. And this is a quick summary that helps to understand when you should use each strategy. It can help you to determine what workloads what approach you can take for each workload, and to help build that overall cloud migration plan. And this is really to summarize those cloud migration strategies that we just went over. So we have the easiest on the left and the most work intensive on the right. But also you do get deeper benefits in terms of cost savings, resiliency, and scalability as you move further to the right as well. One thing I wanted to mention is that I want everybody to be aware of cloud adoption anti-patterns. And when I say anti-patterns, these are things not to do. So please don't do the things that are on the slide here. But there's a few on here that I'd like to go over. The first is to migrate or modernize without guardrails. So when customers deploy their first workloads to the cloud, they consider it as a platform to test innovative solutions, and they enjoy the flexibility that's available within the cloud. But when these workloads become productive and need to hold company data, progress slows down because now they need to adhere to compliance, regulatory, and security standards. So, it's really important to take that into account and to have guardrails from the start. So, for example, policies of what services that can be used and how those services can be used. There's a variety of other items on this screen that I don't have time to go over. But there's a few other ones here, such as misaligned shared responsibilities. And some of these can be extremely problematic. So for example, another like when we talk about misaligned shared responsibilities, frequently when it comes to cloud, there may be multiple groups or departments internally that might be involved in managing these solutions. And one of the biggest challenges is that there may be a gap in terms of the understanding of who's responsible for something, or even overlaps in responsibilities, which can cause multiple problems, such as multiple controls being put in place that do the same thing, or even a missing responsibility. And another one that I'd really like to highlight is the inaccurate out-of-the-box security assumptions. A lot of organizations think that by moving it to the cloud, they'll instantly become more secure, which may be the case, but the level of security is questionable. Depending on the type of cloud service used, with infrastructure as a service as an example, each customer is responsible for securing their workloads. When you move more to software as a service, though, more security responsibility is placed on the cloud provider. So it's really important to make sure that you understand who's responsible for security, and also to ensure that the new workloads have appropriate security controls on them. And that moves a bit more into security, and I'm nearing the end of my presentation here. But how do you secure your workloads? And I want to talk a bit about the pre-migration steps first. So the first thing I would recommend is ensuring that existing security controls are compatible. And when I say this, let's say you have some sort of endpoint protection or EDR platform on VMs. They will probably work if you migrate them to a VM in a cloud environment, but they probably won't be compatible with platform as a service. So if you turn these into containers, you may need to think about, how am I going to protect those containers? The other thing is security controls and tools must be agile. I very, very frequently see organizations that do auto scaling. So that's where you can spin up, let's say, more virtual machines based on the load. But the thing is, I've also seen where security controls don't get installed in time. You may only have a server that exists for 5 or 10 minutes, and maybe it hasn't actually triggered the controls to start yet. So that's something else that should be considered. End-to-end visibility, depending on how you design your cloud platform, you might be using more cloud-native security services. So how do you monitor ingress and egress into your virtual networks now? And then in terms of cost as well, this is mainly related to auditing and security monitoring. I frequently see organizations that are doing cloud migrations, but then proceed to bring those logs back on-prem. And I question why that happens, because you need to pay for outbound data transfers. You also need to pay to store that data. And depending on the cloud provider and the service, some of that may be free if you keep it in the cloud environment. And the other thing is doing a proper gap analysis. And I haven't really talked about threat modeling yet, which is also critically important. But you need to think about, once I move this, how does that impact the controls that I have on my workload? Are they more or less secure? And where are those gaps? How do I cover them? And then when it comes to post-migration, really the blue bar at the bottom of the slide summarizes up, but make sure you utilize the controls that are in cloud environments, including backups. It's so much easier to take backups, for example, of virtual machines in a cloud environment than it would be on-prem. The same with monitoring. You can, using Azure Monitor, for example, you can easily monitor workloads in a very short period of time. as well as security controls are typically easier to implement. But it's important to understand what's available. And also you may want to build a migration process just for those. For example, if you run, let's say, some hardware firewalls right now, Palo Alto or Cisco, you may decide to first migrate those to Azure as well, or build new VMs to perform that function. But eventually you may want to move to, for example, Azure Firewall, which is a platform as a service solution with significantly less cost, maintenance, and increased resiliency and agility. And then also automation. You know, a lot of organizations don't use the automation tools that are available in cloud platforms, but there's a lot of good solutions such as automated update management or desired state configuration, which can keep your workloads in the state that you want them. And these are all provided natively via cloud providers typically. And also the cloud migration journey isn't something that ever ends. It's really a continuous process where you need to be constantly optimizing resources even after the migration. So as you're moving, make sure that we right-size services. So based on the assessment tools, they may recommend based on the historical performance of servers that you assign certain capacity to each workload. But usually you include, a factor to add on some additional room, just in case, maybe the server was under a low amount of load during the assessment period. And also make sure that you take advantage of any reservations, like capacity reservations or reserved instances. If you're going to be running a virtual machine for a year or 3 years, you can save significant costs by committing to that length of time. And then after you move, make sure you continue to monitor your costs. Use the cloud platform provider's recommendation or advisor tool. It may tell you, for example, that virtual machines are oversized or underutilized, or that maybe servers are only logged into during the day, maybe they're a development machine. You can save money by turning those off. And then really the last item is to look at modernizing for longer term value. So even though you might adopt that lift and shift methodology at the beginning, there's nothing to say that you can't change that approach later, and it's typically easier to do once it's in the actual cloud environment. And that's the end of my presentation. For the takeaways, we do have an Azure Migration and Modernization Program checklist. We also have a Trusted Cloud website. If you go to aka.ms/trustedcloud, you can view information about other resources related to cloud migration. And also we have a cloud skills challenge on right now. So if you wanted to get hands-on and learn more about these technologies, you can go to aka.ms/cmcsc. Thank you, everyone.